obviously, you and Julian Assange's case is different, but I see a similarity in that in the case of Assange, God knows how many millions have been spent, hundreds of millions of dollars to go after him. In your case, Chevron has spent millions of dollars to go after you, but it seems to all have the effect, aided by the media, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
to change the subject from, in your case, what Texaco, which became Chevron, did, which people in Ecuador are still ill, and this has not been cleaned up. The billions of gallons of waste that they dumped in Ecuador. In the case of Assange, I mean, the media write-ups, and even you don't even hear about what he released. You only hear about whatever the case they put together against him. It seems like it's this kind of new playbook to essentially, through media, through PR and millions of dollars, to criminalize whether it be publishers or lawyers and completely whitewash what exactly was discovered in the first place, which in your case was that Texaco, which became Chevron, was intentionally dumping their waste in some of the most vulnerable communities on Earth.
Well, I think you nailed it. I mean, basically, it's about finding this is well. Let me just this. It's a playbook, created by the corporate world in conjunction with lawyers, corporate defense lawyers, to basically save big companies or governments from scandals and from being exposed. And in my case, Chevron was exposed. They lost the case. To remind people, since we're always talking about me, let's talk about them. They deliberately dumped 16 billion gallons of cancer-causing waste into the Amazon onto indigenous ancestral lands, and that ended up killing thousands of people from cancers and other diseases. It's been there almost 50 years. It's never been cleaned up. They've lost legal case after legal case, still refused to pay. So they sat around like, how do we avoid paying this? And they're like, well, who can be the face to distract attention from what we did? And they settled on me. And I've been attacked over the last 10 years by 60 Chevron law firms, 2,000 Chevron lawyers. It's a miracle I'm still here, by the way, in my home talking to you. Mm-hmm. I actually think they wanted me to quit the case or even jump off the roof of my building. I mean, things were tough to deal with. Trust me, that obviously that's not the kind of person I am, but I think that was kind of what they tried to do to me. And frankly, I think that's what they're trying to do to Assange right now. It's what I would call induced suicide. Like they create conditions of life that are so horrendous. They want you to just harm yourself and kill yourself, or, have you die like, Magnitsky did in Russia's jails when he started helping expose some of Putin's corruption. So it's a whole playbook. It is designed to distract attention from the wrongdoing of very powerful interests. In my case, fossil fuel interests, Chevron, and Assange's case, the U.S. government, the national security state, out of control, shooting and bombing Iraq in ways that were killing thousands, tens of thousands of innocent civilians. So people are waking up, and a good number of people are realizing the truth. In the Assange case, Nils Meltzer has done some incredible work, the special rapporteur on torture for the United Nations, right, totally exposed the falsity of the charges against Assange out of Sweden. But part of the playbook is before you can bring someone down or before they can be utilized as a effective weapon of mass distraction, which is what Assange is and what I think I am for Chevron, you have to smear the person. You have to sort of prepare the public to not like them. In the Assange case, it was about rape, false charges of rape out of Sweden. And people are like, well, I'm not going to support that guy, even if he is right on the publishing or journalism side, And in my case, it was I bribed a judge in Ecuador, which is completely false. Never happened, rejected by 28 appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada, but found to have happened by Judge Kaplan, the guy who ended up locking me up on this contempt charge.
Right.
So, there's a whole playbook. There's a methodology to what it might appear to be madness, but there's a real well thought through playbook, and it's a corporate playbook. And by the way, if they get away with it with me and continue to get away with it with Assange, and I would argue they're not getting away with it. Too many people know about it, but they plan to keep using this playbook unless people stand up and stop it.
I also wanted to say, part of why they got away with it, ironically, the New York Times finally decided to report on you after you reported to prison. So part of why they're getting away with it, I mean, I do the best I can, and others that do not have the audience of the New York Times have covered this. But some of the preeminent, more mainstream corporate outlets won't touch you with a 10-foot pole. So people who, even in their audience, if they knew about it, would probably be up in arms. For the most part, don't know about it. So I think the media, particularly the New York Times, which we've spoken before, some of their lawyers have a conflict and have ties to a law firm that has done work for Chevron. They have buried this story. So because they bury it, I think things like this are becoming more normalized, and there's a complacency with things that should not be normal. It should not be normal going after whether it be publishers or lawyers or any of this.
Absolutely. And I'm extremely disappointed in the New York Times. I mean, I have a lot of friends who work there. In the years past, they covered the case to some degree effectively. But I'd say for the last 7-8 years, they've almost completely ignored the case. I mean, once it became clear that what was happening to me was the product of what I would call judicial corruption in the United States, corporate judicial corruption, like they had no framework to get their arms around that. And it's because one of the reasons is because Chevron is a major advertiser of the New York Times, and Chevron's main law firm, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, that has been used by Chevron to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees to attack me, also represents the New York Times in their media work. Specifically, there's a lawyer, Ted Boutros Jr., who works for the New York Times directly defending it against lawsuits from people who allege defamation, and he's also working for Chevron to try to bring me down and target me with false accusations as a way to save Chevron from paying the indigenous peoples of Ecuador. So, he wears like one hat over here and he wears another hat over there, and it all adds up to a major conflict of interest for the New York Times. And, they just simply almost completely refuse to cover the fact that a Harvard law grad, classmate of President Obama, a successful human rights lawyer, has been locked up now for 2.5 years at home, literally a 30-minute walk from their newsroom. They just won't cover it. I mean, even if you don't like me, even if you disagree with me, hope you don't, but some people do, you can't argue that is not a newsworthy story. It's right. Newsworthy. Come cover it. You're covering journalists locked up in Myanmar and, the Khashoggi case. And, you just did an editorial about the 200 plus journalists around the world who've been locked up last year, by autocratic regimes. Yet you totally ignore the fact there's a human rights lawyer in your own country down the street from your newsroom who's also locked up for political reasons, and you don't cover it. And it's that kind of bias and lack of balance that severely undermines the credibility of the New York Times. And as you point out, it also, it's a terrible influence because so many other of sort of these, somewhat weak media outlets like CNN, MSNBC, they take their cue from the New York Times. Like if the New York Times covers something, like, okay, we'll cover it too. So when the New York Times doesn't cover, they're like, well, I guess it's not a legitimate story. So it's a real problem. And by the way, I just tweeted out yesterday a tweet to Dean Baquet, the editor of the New York Times, to again end the paper's conflict of interest with Chevron. Okay, you cannot cover Chevron's problems in Ecuador and Chevron's judicial corruption in the United States unless you end your conflict with Ted Boutros. You need to get a different lawyer. Right. You can't use Gibson Dunn as your media law firm. They are knee deep in a news story that you're ignoring while you pay them to defend you against defamation lawsuits. It's a terrible conflict of interest.
And by the way, Gibson Dunn, I think I read they ranked number 2 in anti-climate clients or
Not only
anti.
that, I'll point out law students from dozens of law schools have boycotted. There's an employment boycott against Gibson Dunn because of their
Right.
horrific record on the climate issue.
Yeah.
And other issues, so Gibson Dunn makes profits literally, billions of dollars a year. It's a law firm with 2,000 lawyers around the world by defending interests that are totally destroying our planet. So, law students are speaking out. And I think the firm, just like Chevron itself, is being pummeled by more and more people learning about the awful things they're trying to defend in Ecuador and other places around the world.